Hello and welcome back to the Zest Fresh Service channel, where we talk all things fresh service and give you in-depth explainers on key features in fresh service and how you can get the most out of it. So today we're going to talk about SLAs, and I'm going to break this video down into separate chapters because SLAs have some not necessarily complicated, but I don't know about you, but I find dealing with time really difficult, and how we pull it together and how time changes across time zones and all that sort of thing. So I'm going to break down SLAs and talk about business hours policies, holidays, calendar hours versus business hours, SLAs, OLAs, and then how multiple SLAs apply. So throughout this video, we're going to have separate chapters about separate things, and I'm going to take you through it step by step so that hopefully at the end of this video, you will have a really good, solid understanding about how SLAs work in fresh service. So without further ado, so when we're setting up SLAs in fresh service, so SLAs and business hours become part of the either global settings or the workspace settings. So for the purposes of the demo, I'm going to talk through it all as global settings, but maybe you've got very specific requirements where you need local business hours for more localized teams. I can't think of a situation where you'd really want that. Generally, global teams are global, but we're going to just talk through it that way. So first thing we need to do when we're setting up SLAs is set our business hours. So our business hours define the working hours across the different business days in a fresh service instance. So in this particular example, this is a global company with global business hours. So we've got a lot of business hours here. In the example I'm using, we're looking at collapsing that slightly, which is why we've got this ABCD on the bottom. But generally what you would probably have is a set of local business hours, being that UK, Netherlands, US, and then maybe if you're in the US or India, you might have slightly wider business hours, or in Australia where they have multiple time zones. So what we're going to do is come into Fresh when we first set it up, and we're going to add our business hours. Now there are defaults in here somewhere. Can't see it now, it's not jumping out at me, but we would come in here and set the business hours. So I'm just going to use UK because that's where I am, and for this particular instance we set a name of it. I would try and make them super clear, because what we're going to do in the next part is talk about business hours policies, and it gets a little bit confusing if you make all the names the same. So I would just make it super clear that these are the business hours and what they're for. We set the time zone of those business hours. So here, UK, bit of a bad example because we're in GMT. Let's look at Mauritius as an unusual one. So there we go. So Mauritius is at +4. So we've got that set to Tbilisi at the moment. And then that is 10 till 7 their time rather than 10 till 7 my time. So that's how you start handling multiple time zones. So I'm going to carry on talking to UK because I can talk about holidays and that sort of thing accurately as we're going through this. So we're going to set the business hours. We're setting them as working days. So typical 9 to 5. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, 9 to 5. They do not apply Saturday, Sunday. So those are grayed out. And then we add the holidays. Now, when you add the holidays, I definitely know this is true for the UK and US. I cannot comment on other countries because I don't know how public holidays work. But when you come in here to import holidays and you select from the list, it will pull in all holidays, not necessarily the legal holidays. So for example, this has been tidied up to reduce the duplicates, but it will include Guy Fawkes Night, it includes Halloween, it includes Valentine's Day, it includes Burns Night. Those are either not holidays at all, so like Valentine's Day is not a public holiday, but then it might include one for Scotland. So it's just something to consider. If you have got teams working in Scotland and England, maybe you need to have different business hours for Scotland because they've got different holidays, depending on what your company observes. The other thing to consider when you're setting yearly holiday list is we've got a customer who's Russell Group University. We use the holiday list to say when the university is closed. So it's not for them just Easter, Good Friday and Easter Monday. They are closed over that whole half-term period. They're closed for exam week. They're closed for other bits of events going on throughout the year. So we put their patterns of business activity, as we call it in ITIL, into Fresh as holidays. If they are not rotating, then it's obviously just worth remembering to go back and double check them. I would recommend you use the scheduler function in Fresh to schedule yourself a ticket on the 1st of December that says, on the 1st of December, raise me a ticket to my Fresh Service admin to go and check the holidays for next year and make sure they're all good. Or indeed, whatever your business pattern is it the 1st of December? For the university, I would probably do the 1st of August because their holidays run, their year really runs September to August. But it's just a little trick there about keeping that up to date. So we would go through here, and we would set our business hours, and then that would be set for the different hours that our businesses work. Generally, you're going to have one, maybe two. Global business like this may have a significant number. And for the purposes of this example, we also then are looking at experimenting with clustering them together as examples of what's going on. So this is a slightly different thing. Well, that's clustered together. Don't need to worry about that. So I'm going to pause there. That's business hours. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about business hours policies. So business hours policies is here right next to business hours. It's under the same area. So business hours policies are when should those business hours apply to our ticket? And I'm going to carry on talking about ticket because talking about tickets, changes, and problems all in one go is going to be too difficult and not enough to explain. So a business hours policy says these business hours apply to this ticket under these circumstances. So, for example, where we've got this global organization with lots of clusters of time zones, what we've done is we've said, for this particular example, the business hours that apply to the ticket are based on the location of the user, for example. So in this case, we are saying this is the business hours policy for cluster A. It takes the business hours of cluster A, and it should apply to tickets that have the following locations. So for any tickets raised by a user in Tunisia, Morocco, Cote d'Ivoire, or Mauritius, these business hours apply. We then say them again all the way through West Africa, EMEA, UK, India, Australia, Japan, Americas, as an example. So United States, Canada, Trinidad, Tobago, Mexico, Brazil. So those are how this particular setup is set up. You may choose to have a different way of doing it, and you say my business hours, so my example policy, I'm going to make it GMT because we're just going to keep making this easy for me to explain. And then what I can do is, based on the properties of the ticket, I can then say when those business hours apply. So for me, it is most likely to be, for most customers, either the business hours apply to the ticket based on the location of the user, or they apply to the ticket based on the agent group. Can I think of a reason why I would do it any other way? Yes, I might do it differently for service. But if we were doing it based on service, service is not a property that's available here, and we would have to have a slightly different way of setting it up to link our services and our asset management to our tickets to then link to our business hours policies, and we're not going to get into that today. So say personally for me, business hours would either apply based on the group that it's assigned to, or the agent, or the location of the user. So in this case, we use location of the user. We can see locations there, and we can then list all the locations out the same way we had them before. So business hours set, these are our timeframes. Business hours policies set when those timeframes apply to a ticket, a change, or a problem. So we've set up our business hours, we've got business hours, we've got our business hours policies. Now let's talk about our SLAs. So within SLAs, which again can be global within a Fresh that has multiple workspaces, or can be local, we are able to then say this SLA policy applies to this ticket, and that is in conjunction with the business hours. So the business hours say between 9 and 5 GMT, the clock runs. That is when our clock is running. And then the SLA says, and this is what the stops are on that clock. Those are the timers on that clock. So when we set up a new policy, which we can have on a ticket, and then an SLA can apply on a ticket, and OLA applies to a task, a change, or a problem. But same principle, different language. So if I'm setting up an SLA for a ticket, so this is my new example SLA, what I'm able to do here is then define whether something is business hours or calendar hours. And you will see that language throughout Fresh on SLAs, on workflows, on various bits of where else, supervisor rules, that's what I'm thinking of. Business hours says this clock runs against whatever business hours are applied to that ticket. based on the business hours policy. Calendar hours basically means it runs 24/7. So it ignores holidays, it ignores the time of day, it just runs 24/7. So generally, when we're setting up an SLA, if people don't have SLAs, you generally, if you've got a level of on-call happening within an organization, you'd be urgent and high are running 24/7 on my calendar hours. I probably want an urgent response within 15 minutes and a resolution within 2 hours, not 2 minutes. And a high, I'd want a response within 15 minutes and a restore within 4 hours. For example, sorry, resolve. Resolve and restore, two different things. So the definition of response here is a public response has been made by a human being on the ticket to the requester. That is the definition of first response in Fresh. So any autoresponders, any public notes, anything like that will not stop that clock unless a human being did it. So what that looks like then in tickets is here. So you can see this is a test ticket. It's missed first response. So first response was due on this ticket 2 weeks ago because it's sitting in the sandbox. If I now go back and reply and say, hey, Roxanne, that is now going to stop that clock. So you can see first response has been met. It's disappeared off of there. In the reporting in the background, it will go down as when the first response timestamp happened, and it will go down that it was late and how late it was. That will only work when a human being replies. No autoresponders, no workflow, no nothing. No scenario automators. It has to be a human being triggering that to make that clock stop. It's just something to be aware of. Resolution is at the point the ticket is moved to resolve. It's not service restoration. So depending on what your policy is for when a ticket moves to resolve, is it at the point of service restoration or is it the point at which the user has claimed resolution? It's up to you. But Fresh stops the clock on resolve when the status moves to resolved. So you can see here, resolution was due by this. If I move this to resolved, it's going to want me to add a note. It's going to want me to add this. That's fine. That's now resolved. And the clock has stopped. So again, when I move it to resolved, that's when the clock stops. If I reopen that, the clock will start again, and the counter for reopen count will then be incremented in the background. So now we're back to resolved again. So generally, respond, resolve, high, medium, probably calendar hours. Sorry, high and urgent calendar hours. Medium might be 4 hours on a medium, 3 days on a resolve. Again, this is entirely up to you how you want to do it. And then that might be 8 hours on a low and 5 days on a low. So, and I can turn escalation emails on or off. Generally, for my customers, I'm like, turn the emails off. You won't look at them. People will filter them out. Only have Fresh send you emails when you actually care and you're actually going to do something about it. So I generally suggest turning these off. Otherwise, it just gets super. And if you're having a problem and it's super noisy, then you should be sitting in your queue, looking at your dashboards, not looking at your Outlook, getting loads of emails, getting annoyed because they all look the same. So we set our SLA. We then say this SLA applies under these conditions. So we've set the business hours and we've set the business hours policy. So we say the working day for this ticket is this, depending on the ticket properties. And now we say the stopwatch on that ticket, if you like, is now running across that day. And it looks like this, depending on the priority of the ticket, which we're setting here on the top. And then we're saying on the tickets of X type. So again, this is where you can say this applies to only incidents. This applies to tickets in a specific group. So maybe this is the SLA for the service desk and the SLA for the third line teams is different. So maybe I come in here and I say group is service desk, for example, versus in this instance there's HR on here. So maybe they don't apply. And I can go through and I can be as specific as I wish to be. Maybe I'm saying that it only applies to IT under the workspace. Maybe I'm saying it only applies to certain categories of ticket. So generally, I would say you have an SLA that says for this workspace, for IT, this is the SLA for IT. And we run that SLA across all groups, and groups don't tend to have different SLAs depending on the group. However, what we may do is we may have different SLAs for different types of ticket. So one thing to be aware of, if you haven't noticed before when we talk about SLAs, if I just left that SLA like that, it would apply to every type of ticket. However, what's quite common is incidents follow this matrix: 15 minutes, 30 minutes, 4 hours, 8 hours, because I want to have a response within that amount of time. However, service requests do not. Service requests tend to have a priority that is relative to the importance of the thing, about how much somebody's complaining about it or likely to complain about it, but actually the given SLA between IT as the provider and the customer is more generally probably 2 plus 5 or 4 hours plus 5 days. So what you may wish to do, for example, if I open a new one, for my service requests, actually, I want a flat SLA, regardless of how urgent or what the priority is of that SLA, of that service request. Now, by making these all the same, what I'm able to do is negate some of the behavior whereby an urgent service request doesn't necessarily mean I am contractually obliged, I use contractually in the loosest sense of the term, either as the third party or as the internal team, to deliver that any quicker. So by making this completely flat and then making this type is service request, what that means is I can change the priority of the service request in my ticket list view, so I can make it clear to my agents which ones are the most important because I'm getting it in the neck because it's the CEO's iPad. However, I'm not disadvantaging myself against my clock by saying I needed to respond to that within 15 minutes, because it's not the same as an incident. All I'm saying is to look at that quickly, but my clock stays the same. So now I've got separate SLAs for incidents and service requests, which is something that's probably quite common for people to actually want to do, but they maybe don't think about it straight away. So worth thinking about. So we've said this is the clocks that are running within our business hours. This is when they apply, again, using ticket properties. And then if I really wanted to, I can say at the point the due dates for respond and resolve come in, do I want to hit escalation and change those escalation emails? Personally, I don't think that's the way to manage stuff. I just think sending emails out of the ticketing system is a bad habit, and you can come in the comments and argue with me about it or not. I just encourage customers to turn off as many emails as possible, because when you get an email from Fresh, you actually want to be going, I need to do something, not, oh, there's another one, because we didn't meet it. So worth being aware of. Just as a side note, while we're talking about priority of service requests, depending on how you've chosen to set up your Fresh, if you have disabled priority but left impact and urgency on, so here on a ticket, on an incident, priority will automatically update based on how impact and urgency are changed, she says. She has to actually make it change. There we go. If I change that to a service request, the same behavior does not apply by default. Now, I'm pretty sure in this example, we're going to see it work because I set it up. No, not on this one. So can you see that's moved down, but it didn't change. If you want that same behavior on service requests, you have to set it up as a workflow. And I would set up in a custom object. And if we want videos about that, I'll explain how you do it, but it's just something to be aware of. The priority matrix does not apply when you change impact and urgency in the same way to service requests as it does to incidents. If you hadn't realized that, it's worth keeping an eye out. Again, quite often I advocate, a lot of teams coming into Fresh are coming off of no system or a very limited system or a very old system, and they aren't necessarily always the most mature of teams from a textbook point of view. I often advocate for actually just hiding these two things. Unless you absolutely need it to manage your incidents, because that is how you manage things, I would hide it, to be honest. I know that's sacrilege from a textbook point of view, but It's 3 extra boxes on here. It's 2 extra clicks for the user. It's an extra rule to disable this so it stays in sync. Da da da. Do I need to know impact and urgency to drive priority? Not really. Do I give the user the ability to change impact and urgency when they submit a ticket by the portal? No, I do not, because they do not know what it means in the same way that IT knows what it means, and they're just going to set everything to high, which makes all my priorities high, which makes all my SLAs short. So unless you've got a really, really good reason to need it, I often advocate for hiding these and just simplifying it and just stick with priority, because everybody gets the concept there is clear. But it's up to you, just personally how we do it and how we do it for customers. Right, we're going to talk about OLAs, SLAs versus OLAs. So it's more of a textbook thing than it is a technology thing in this case. SLAs, service level agreements, the agreement between me and as the provider and the customer. OLAs, operational level agreements, the agreement between me as the service desk provider and another peer team or another team within me as the supplier. Does it make a fundamental difference within Fresh how it's set up? No. Does it make a fundamental difference if you are reading the textbook and you are sticking to the textbook? If you really wish to do it and argue about it that way, you're more than welcome. I think a lot of teams are over it. Personally, it's up to you. The way it works in Fresh is SLAs apply to tickets, OLAs apply to tasks, changes, and problems because they are internal to the agents within Fresh, whereas tickets are between me as the service provider as the agent and the user. They are set up in basically the same way. So rather than me saying based on the priority of what's going on, I'm saying what's the OLA target for different types of. So by default, unless you set up specific rules, they will start to apply to do a task within 24 business hours, for example. This is default, it hasn't been changed. What I can do is set up new policies. So here's my example, task policy. And I do have to specify with tasks what that belongs to. Ticket, problem, change, release. We're going to stick with ticket. I haven't seen anybody use change tasks or problem tasks in a way that would be significantly structured. Let's put it that way. So there's my example task policy. What's my OLA target? It's probably 3 days for what I want to do. What I'm going to do on this case, let's pretend we have automated tickets that generate daily check tasks, or let's do a better one. Let's say tasks for new joiners. So my workflow has run, it's raised my new joiner ticket, Fresh has added my task to my new joiner, and now I'm going to say when the title of this starts with a create account for, so let's pretend my new joiner workflow runs, it adds a task to create the account. So when it's create an account for X is the task, then I want to give it 3 days. And now whenever I create a task with the title that starts with create an account for, and obviously that would have the name on it afterwards, then it will apply 3 days. If I do not do that, it will apply 24 hours throughout the process. So I find that a little bit awkward sometimes as a setup and when I'm trying to set due dates and that sort of thing. Tasks is not my favorite bit of technology within Fresh, partly because they're arrays and they're ordered by the creation date, not necessarily by the numerical date time. Loops probably makes that easier, and I should probably go back and look at it in a bit more detail again. Now we've got loop as of December 2025, and I'm now talking to you in April 2026 to think about. Not my favorite thing. I think there's better ways of doing it, but that's how that works there. And then the same thing applies to changes. I must admit, I have not personally sat down and played with policy and SLA policies for changes and how that works. It has not come up as a requirement that anybody has come back to talk to me about, but it is there. So tickets and tasks, yes. Changes and problems, not so much. Reading about things like cab windows and lead times for submission for change or approval windows for change and that sort of thing, but maybe not SLA policies for change. But, again, come in the comments and tell me how you guys are using it or whether you've got any specific questions. It has not been something that we have come across in 3 years of doing this full time as anybody's come and asked me. Well, we've had to go and look at it. Right, so we've talked about business hours policies, holidays, calendar hours versus business hours, SLAs and OLA, and then we're going to talk about multiple SLAs. So the last part of this is multiple SLAs. So again, most customers who are not managed service providers have 1, maybe 2 SLAs defined. If you're a managed service provider in Fresh, you then may have more. If you've got, or in this case, for example, the customer in the example has an SLA policy for US versus UK with slightly different escalation, and then they have a slightly different SLA for join, remove, or leaver tickets versus other things. So these will apply in the order which you set them, a bit like a workflow. So by default, the first one will apply, and then it'll go all the way down the list and go, is there anything else that applies? Yes, stop there. If not, then go down to the default. So if you're finding your SLAs are a bit weird and you're not really sure what's going on, that's the place to go and look. Are they in the correct order for how you want them to apply and stop? If you want to go look at a ticket specifically and what SLA is running on that ticket, remember that SLAs can change on a ticket as the ticket moves around. So here's an example from earlier. This ticket was raised by me. The system has executed the default SLA because there was no location set on that ticket. So it's picked up the default. We've then got behavior in this particular instance of Fresh to go and get the requester's location and set the ticket to the correct location. So in this case, it's actually my API key, it's not me that is doing that. So you can see the location was set to India, so the business hours policy changed. And you can see that change there. Then I was testing it, I set it as Canada, it's picked up the other one. And then it's moved it back and it said, yeah, we're still running under this SLA, it's still sitting under G because I'm in Canada. So it's worth being aware as well, if a ticket moves around groups, changes location, if one of those conditions that applies that SLA changes, then Fresh will reapply the SLA as the ticket is going around. So if you suddenly see these clocks are changing, it's like, what's going on? Fresh is applying it. You can see it in the activities tab to kind of work backwards about what's happening. As I say, for me, they're either by group or by user location. If you want to do it by service, it's more convoluted. You can do it. I have done it. And so what you might see, again, more in an MSP sense, is maybe the ticket is raised by default and the company is set to the MSP. And then you say, no, it's a customer ticket. I'm going to switch the company on the ticket to something else. That would be another situation where you then may say, actually, the internal SLA is not applying because it's not a company ticket. It's a customer ticket. Therefore, reapply the SLA. That's the only other situation I've seen that kind of happening in a real world scenario. But again, I'm always enjoying talking to customers and going, and we were talking to somebody on Monday. I can't remember the question they were asking us. It's like, yes, I think you can. No one's ever asked me that question, and I would want to go double check that you can. So yeah, different customers, different needs, different businesses, always with something new and interesting to try out. So if you have any more questions about SLAs, it's a really highly Google search question for Fresh, hence we're making a video about it. Then do drop us a comment below and we'll come back, or drop us an email. Always more than happy to answer questions that people have, because quite often they're really simple or they're really great ideas for content. If you do need any Freshservice support, consulting, training, app development, portal development, please do check out the website. That is what myself and the team do all day long for customers all over the world, not just in the UK. Big projects, small projects, the answer is normally yes, we can help, and we pride ourselves on just doing Fresh. So if you need a Freshservice expert, you know where to come find us. Drop us a line, check out the website, and look forward to seeing you in the next video. Cheers, bye.
Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe to stay up to date with the latest features and tutorials. If you or your organization need help with Freshservice, check out our consulting, implementation, training and support services at our website. Zest.co.uk. Zest, a fresh perspective.